Welcome to FACT's webinar called How to Plan, Promote, and Host a Pasture Walk. It's presented by Kristen Jurczyk. This webinar is hosted by Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT. I am Larissa McKenna, FACT's Humane Farming Program Director, and I will be moderating the webinar this afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. It's certainly my pleasure to have you here. So Food Animal Concerns Trust, we are a national nonprofit organization. We are headquartered in Chicago, and we promote the safe and humane production of meat, milk, and eggs. I direct FACT's Humane Farming Program, which provides a number of opportunities for livestock and poultry farmers to increase the number of animals that are raised humanely. This webinar is part of our Humane Farming webinar series. So you please visit our website to learn more about our farmer services, including our new mentorship program, and to register for an upcoming webinar. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our expert presenter, Kristen Jurczyk. Kristen owns and operates Brasset Family Farm in Wisconsin with her family. She is also a certified grazing planner and educator. In 2016, Kristen was awarded a Fund a Farmer grant from FACT to convert a continuously grazed pasture into a managed intensive grazed pasture for her beef cattle. So I'm absolutely honored that Kristen is with us today to share her bounty of knowledge and experience. And like I said, she will be available to answer your questions at the end of this webinar. So with that, I am going to hand the virtual mic over to Kristen so that she may start her presentation. Kristen, please take it away.
Thank you, Larissa. So I would like to thank Larissa for all her work on this webinar. She's a great multitasker, so that's fantastic. I would like to thank FACT for all their hard work with farmers. As Larissa said, we did receive a FACT grant a few years back, and we basically had a sacrifice pasture that we had been continuously grazing on through certain parts of the year that we were able to install a bunch of different cover crops in to extend our grazing season and really make that part of our farm look like the rest of our farm in detailed managed intensive grazing. So I'm the operator of our family's farm, Brasset Family Farm. We graze about 110 head of beef cattle on 146 acres. We've hosted many pasture walks I have at our farm. And then I also work very part-time for Glacierland RC&D as a grazing educator, for Grassworks as a grazing educator, and for Renewing the Countryside, hosting different on-farm events. Some of the work I'm doing with Grassworks was funded through SARE, so I wanted to give a thank you out there to SARE. As part of a project, we put together a toolkit on hosting pasture walks, and so I used that toolkit to put together this presentation today. So I want to thank you all for attending, and we are going to get started here with how to plan, promote, and host a pasture walk. So when we're planning a pasture walk, I think pasture walks are a lot of fun. They're a great way to share a lot of information with a lot of people in a really fun setting. And even though this presentation is entitled How to Planning a Pasture Walk, I think we can use the same information to do any field day. Maybe it's a cover crop field day, maybe it's a CSA field day, but any really type of field day we want, they all kind of follow the same scenario. So the first question I'd like to ask is, why are we hosting this pasture walk? What is our goal of this pasture walk, of this day? And that is usually answered, for me, by what is our funding source for hosting this pasture walk? Do we have a specific funder who has given us money to host the pasture walk? Maybe we have applied for and received a SARE Farmer Rancher grant, and as part of our reporting for that grant, we had said we are going to host a pasture walk to share with other regional farmers what we did and how it worked out. So if there's a specific funding source, then we have a real clear idea of why are we hosting this. Which then leads into what are our educational goals and what is the take-home message we want to share with the other farmers. The answers to those questions are really going to dictate who's going to participate and who our partners and attendees will be. Who are we looking to reach out to? So I have a scenario here of the photos that you see, the top one. We had some funding. We had a NRCS funding to educate farmers on pasture soil health. So you can see a picture of a pasture walk where we have a soil test pit dug and presenters on that topic. So once we answer those questions as to who's our funding source, if we have one, maybe it's that we're doing a pasture walk for our consumers. I frequently do pasture walks in the summer or clients thank yous where I invite all the clients to our farm, out to our farm, and I also invite the general public to learn more about our farm. But once we answer the questions to those, why are we doing this? What are our educational goals? Who's funding? Then I feel like we can really pick good partners to partner with for the project. And partners can come in the form of partners that have funding. So if I'm wearing my grazing educator hat, I may have a grant that will help me fund pasture walks on other people's farms. Partners may come in the form of a partner who can donate food to the event, or a partner who can print materials for the event, or it might be an extension agent who can help coordinate the event or provide support the day of the event. So I feel like our partners come in all different shapes and sizes. So then the question of when we're going to host the event, that really too ties back up into what are our educational goals, our funding source for the event. So certain grants will have certain timelines. Of course, we'd have to host within the timelines of the funding source. But really, what are our educational goals for this event? Because the goals are going to dictate the season we host the event. If we want to talk, we've done several pasture walks on grazing height and grazing more mature forage. Well, then obviously we're going to want to host that when we can see the high forage growing and we can see the cattle in that high forage. So I feel like those are really important. The when is really going to depend on the educational goals of the event. The when is also going to depend on what else is going on in that region at that time. So if I'm hosting a pasture walk at my farm, I don't want to host it the same time as my county fair. I don't want to host it the same time as our Grassworks picnic. I kind of want to go online and see what else is going on in my region at that time, the season I want to host, so I'm not competing with somebody else for attendance. And then where we're going to host the pasture walk, that too is going to go with the goals. If I'm wearing my grazing educator hat, I want to host it on a farm that is doing what we want to show. Obviously, if I'm hosting it as my own event with my consumers or with some other group, then obviously the where is sort of an easy question because that would be at my house or at my farm. So one of the things I like to do when I wear my grazing educator hat working with a lot of different farmers, if I have a funding source, I like to try to plan a whole pasture walk season initially so that the whole season flows together and works together and that all the farms and farmers work together. So an example would be some of the NRCS funding we've had in the past. We had NRCS funding to educate farmers on pasture soil health, and we had SARE funding to educate educators on pasture soil health. So under that project, we had a planning meeting. I really like to involve the farmers in the initial planning of the activity. So what I really like to do is have a planning meeting with producers and partners in November. So while the grazing season is really fresh in their mind, while they can really think about what worked really well for me this year or what did I struggle with, what do I need to know more about. So usually we're wrapping up our grazing in Wisconsin here towards mid to end of November, and I feel like that is a perfect time to have a roundtable discussion with producers and partners to talk about our upcoming educational needs and to talk about what farmers really want to know and who is willing to host a pasture walk. I like to, when I have the budget for it, I really like to have a winter workshop. So if we have a November discussion with our farmers, Then in December, we can plan a winter workshop based on the ideas the farmers themselves and the needs they had with what they came up with. So I like to host a workshop with the topics that we will then see during our pasture walks for the next season. So you can kind of see my schedule online here. I don't really need to read it to you, but so in January we will pick farms. We will talk to the farmers and we will plan the pasture walks. In February we will announce events, and then in March, late February, early March, depending on what else is going on, we will host workshops for the farmers. And what I really like to do is to have a farmer roundtable, wrap that meeting up, and the farmers that are presenting at the roundtable at this workshop will be the farmers who are hosting pasture walks in that region that upcoming season. So an example would be we had this NRCS and SARE funding for pasture soil health for farmers and for other grazing educators and for agency staff. And so we had invited Ray Archuleta from NRCS and Justin Morris to come give a day-long presentation on pasture soil health at a workshop. And then we had a panel of 6 farmers that had some education in pasture soil health and were doing different things on their farm to increase their pasture soil health. And they were a round table. Then April through October of that year, we hosted pasture walks, and they included using a rainfall simulator to show pasture soil health, digging soil test pits to actually look at the soil for pasture soil health, looking at grazing height to increase pasture soil health. So just the different things that we brought up in our workshop, and we found that type of planning a pasture walk season worked really well for us as planners, and it also worked really well for the farmers who were participating, for the host farmers. So in our planning a pasture walk, that schedule kind of showed that we only had our pasture walks from April through October. Under past projects, we have hosted pasture walks every month of the year. So we had hosted, if you look at the upper left picture, this is a pasture walk that was hosted on a farm in central Wisconsin, and it was hosted in January, I think, or February. I guess the date says February. It was a very cold day. It was a 2-hour pasture walk during the heat of the day. But what that farmer really wanted to illustrate was they really wanted to illustrate their outwintering practices. They had two different feeding methods they were using for outwintering and feeding their livestock, and they really wanted to share that with other people. So the prime time to do that pasture walk was while they were doing it. It was a cold day, but we had about 50 to 60 people attend that pasture walk, and so we had great participation and education from that. If you look at the picture on the upper right-hand side, we had a group of beginning farmers who were really interested in learning more about fence building. So they were all excited to get grazing that season, and they needed to get some fence up, so the best time to do that pasture walk was early spring. So you can see there's no leaves on the trees yet. It was still pretty brisk out, but it was the perfect time for that group of people to attend a fencing demonstration. With every plan, I really like to have a backup plan. And so part of the backup plan in this situation was the weather could have been really bad. So you can kind of see a hoop house that is empty. We were able to utilize that hoop house for people to sit in while we had some presentations going on. But it was also our backup plan that if it was really cold and really rainy, there was no floor in that shed, and we could go ahead and pound a couple posts and show some people how to string wire and what to do, and we could still accomplish the goals of our day inside that hoop house. So that was kind of handy. During the spring and during the summer, I really like to have twilight pasture walks. Twilight pasture walks are a great way for busy people with day jobs to still be able to attend pasture walks and not have to take time off work. So the lower left is a photo of a twilight pasture walk. I really like holding them in May, June, and July. One of the things we do deal with in Wisconsin is the mosquito is our state bird. So if we are hosting a June or July pasture walk, right when it starts to get dark out, the mosquitoes really get fierce, and usually it sends everybody home right away. So as long as we're wrapped up by then, I do feel like twilight pasture walks are a great way to engage a lot of people. Twilight pasture walks in the fall don't work as well because the days are shorter, and it just gets, if it's getting dark too early, that's not going to work well because we can't see what we need to see. But those work really well. The lower left, so depending on getting back to the goals of our day again, depending on what our goals of our day are and who we're engaging in the pasture walks, really depend what I need for facilities at the pasture walk. So the lower left was an October pasture walk, and this pasture walk was held for a group of conservation-minded people, so not actually farmers, that were attending a national conference in a nearby city, and were coming out by bus. And so with that group, I thought, boy, the weather could get really bad. I want a lot of learning to go on here. I want it to be a decent learning environment. So in that situation, we had a big tent that we could totally enclose and put propane heaters in if we needed to do some of our talking before we took the tour around the farm to get people warmed up when they came back. Really any time of the year can be a great time for a pasture walk as long as we plan correctly for it.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Kirsten. We've had a couple of questions about the slides progressing and the images. I know that there are maybe a couple people in the audience that can't see the actual slides, and I think that has to do with internet connectivity. So I apologize for that. This presentation will be available. I'm going to send around the slides and a recording of it for those of you that either want to watch it again or are experiencing some issues watching it the first time around. So just wanted to address that before we move on.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, so once we're in our planning stage, I really feel like a successful pasture walk, a successful day-long workshop, whatever field events we're doing, really whatever event we're doing, the key of it is planning. I mean, really planning and having all the partners participate at whatever level they've committed to participating at. So we don't want everybody running in different directions. We want everybody working together. So the planning process is really, really the key. Whether I'm wearing my farmer hat and I have agreed to host a pasture walk for someone else, or whether I'm wearing my grazing educator hat and I'm the lead person hosting the pasture walk at a producer's farm. So the best thing to do is for all involved, to sit down and have a meeting. And it's best if we can do it in person. If we can't do it in person and we can do a FaceTime meeting, that's great. And if it has to be just a conference call, that works too. But really an in-person meeting or an anytime meeting like this is really the best way to plan it, depending on what we have for budget and how far away our partners are in regional space. So each good pasture walk needs a point coordination person, so the person who's in charge. And that person can be the farmer, it can be one of the partners, but that role needs to be clearly defined right up front. So that person is going to be the one that runs the meetings with the partners. And frequently, I feel like that is the person who is going to do the most legwork for the event. So when that person calls the meeting, then everybody needs to join in and come up with whatever they can give for a commitment to the event. So that kind of goes back to our initial, who are our partners and why? So an example that I will use that has worked well for me is if I'm hosting a pasture walk on an organic dairy farm, I will probably, in that county, the farmers probably already come to me and said, we'd like to host a pasture walk. Can you help us? So that at that point we say, okay, who do you ship your milk to? One of my partners frequently would be Organic Valley because they are able to provide products in the form of food for the event, sometimes great speakers, and sometimes they will frequently do outreach and advertising the event to the other organic producers in the region. Then another partner normally would be a UW Extension person or a land and water conservation person or an NRCS person. So some agency people that can do some photocopying for supplies. They can be on the site to help with the event. They can help line up other speakers because they have some daytime budget to work on it as well. So that's just one example of partners, but partners can come, again, in every shape and size. One of the things that I really warn everybody not to do, because we've probably all been there before, is to bite off more than we can chew. So if I'm the farmer hosting the event, and maybe it's an event for women in agriculture, or maybe it's an educational event for Pheasants Forever, or for whomever it's for, if I'm part of that team, I need to make sure that I'm not biting off more than I can chew. So, for example, if it's going to be a day-long workshop, I don't want to necessarily be in charge of providing the lunch for that workshop or even coordinating the food for that workshop because I'm already getting my farm ready and I might be lining up some speakers and I'm just doing a lot of other things. So I feel like we just need to be really careful that everybody has a role, that we lay out a schedule. Sometimes the more partners we get, the slower things move because a lot of us work very part-time, have really crazy work hours and schedules, and things can get really behind sometimes when we have too many partners if we don't have a really firm schedule. So everybody will say what they can contribute to the event as a partner, but then the point contact person really needs to say, okay, and we will do this by this date, and then have everybody participate. That point contact person needs to schedule mile points and check-in meetings, whether they're just frequently, if we have one upfront meeting, then our mile point meetings can be conference calls. They can even be, group emails where everybody's indicated what they've done and where they are. And by working through this with partners, we can develop really long-term, trusted partnerships and relationships where we really know who's going to follow through and what that's going to look like and how that's going to work. But having that established key contact person is really going to be critical, whether it be the farmer or one of the partners. So our partners are going to work together to plan the workshop. And again, we're going to go right back to what are the goals? What are the educational goals? Maybe those have been dictated by a funding source. Maybe they have been dictated by the farmer. Maybe they have been encouraged by the partners. But what are those educational goals, and who are our attendees going to be? Are we looking to have a pasture walk for 2 hours with 40 people? Are we looking to really get a lot of information out there and have a whole day-long workshop where we have 3 or 4 expert presenters, and our goal is to have 80 to 100 attendees? What are those goals going to be? Because those goals are really going to depend how we promote our pasture walk. Is how much effort we put into that is really going to depend on what the goals of the day are going to be. Obviously, the more people we're going to want to affect, the more effort we're going to need to put into promoting our pasture walk. So with promoting the pasture walk, it's just like voting. The earlier and the more often we can vote, the more success the elected official we're voting for is going to have. So not really, but promoting early and often is really, really the key. So if we go back to the scenario where we can plan a whole season, a whole field day, pasture walk, a whole season at once, we can have a lot of that promotional stuff done during the winter. Prior to, at least in Wisconsin, for my work, our conference season. So the main conferences that as a grazing educator in Wisconsin that I attend are the Grassworks Grazing Conference and the Most Organic Conference. So if I already have these events all figured out, I can do save the date postcards and leave at different tables at the event. I can also have sent that around already to the farmers so they can put it on their calendar in January and February and know what's going on for the grazing season. But the earlier we can get this information out, the better. I also feel like it's sort of an obligation to the funding source. So no matter who our funder is, if somebody has given us funding to do this, then I feel like we really owe it to them to follow through and to do a good job with our work. So we can do save the date notices. One of the partner members needs to be in charge of writing up the initial. I just call it the initial press release. It's the same information we're going to use for our social media contacts, for our direct contacts, probably for newspaper articles, and then for the press releases that go out. That's a really important part of the project. Working really closely, whether you're the farmer and you're writing this, talking about why you're hosting it, making sure you're including all the partners in it, is really important. If you're a partner and you're working through this with the farmer, it's really important to show this information to the farmer before you release it to the press, to make sure all the information you have learned about their farm, that you've learned it correctly, and that you are announcing it correctly. In the press release and all the media about it, I really like to give, obviously, we need to list all the partners. We need to list the farm. We need to list the schedule. And then I really like to include the take-home message goals because that, I feel like, attracts more people to the event. I also really like to include directions to the event in that press release. A lot of people, have a GPS on their phone or in their car, but a lot of people still don't in rural areas. Or in a lot of rural areas in Wisconsin, we'll lose connection for our GPS, and that's probably a nationwide thing. So having directions in the information we're putting out there has worked really well. And also, I love to do pre-registration. Even if it's just a smaller pasture walk, pre-registration is huge to me. It does several things. One, if people call me or email me about an event, or if they do it online, I have questions for them about their own farm. So it engages people more in the event if they pre-register for the event and they tell you a little bit about themselves. What is their farm type? What are their livestock type? How long have they been farming? Just a few really basic questions that they can fill in blanks to. Or if they call you, just to ask them a little bit about their farm, to get to know them a little bit better. I love online ones and emailed ones because then I have their email address correctly for future databases, for future direct contact with them via e-blast. So those are all good reasons to have pre-registration. So when I think about how I'm actually, once I have the information written up and all the partners and the farmer have all agreed to it, agree with it, then we have to think about how are we going to promote this. And so if I'm doing an event where I'm looking to affect young people, maybe high school students, maybe college students, I'm actually going to promote that event very differently than if I'm looking to promote it to the regular farmers in my community, which our farming community is an older farming community. So I highly doubt that the high school kids and that the college students spend much time reading our state ag paper press releases. But I do know that the farm community does. So if I'm looking towards a younger generation, I'm going to focus more on social media. If I'm looking towards other groups, I'm going to focus on social media, newspaper articles, press releases, partners, and direct contacts from my existing databases. So if I'm looking for a large crowd, I'm going to try to get this out often and early. If I'm looking for a small crowd, I might just announce it a few times. But again, it all goes back to our goals. I do like to get the first initial press releases out to the state ag paper like 5 weeks prior to the event. And I definitely want to have an email go to the people in my existing databases at least 3 times, if not more, about this event, because that just seems, in our experience, what's really, really gotten people there. So then on to the hosting of the events. We've put a lot of work into planning our events, knowing what we're going to talk about, knowing who's going to do what partner is going to do what, who are our speakers going to be. Maybe it's just going to be a farmer-led pasture walk, and that is perfect. But we know what it's going to look like. A pre-walk a week prior to a pasture walk is a really wonderful thing to do if the project has budget for it. What I find is if we can come out to the farm, and it doesn't have to be all the partners, but the most participating partners. It may not be a guest speaker because they may be from ways away, but the people who've coordinated it and the farmer meeting together a week ahead of time at the farm really puts everybody at ease about the event, and it just makes the event happen so much more smoothly. So what I like to do is do a dry walkthrough, if possible, a week in advance. And in this dry walkthrough, we are going to walk, or if it's going to be a hay wagon ride around the farm, like we do at my farm, we'll hook up the wagon and we'll drive it, and we will time the day. So we will talk about who's going to talk about what at which stop and how many minutes do they have to do so. This might bring up some last-minute changes. The farmer might really be into keeping bees, but there might be a lot of beehives, and everybody might not be really that comfortable walking right by those bees on a day where the bees are kind of angry or driving by them. So sometimes the walkthroughs will say like, oh, wait a minute, can we just go over here? Some farmers are really comfortable having a group of people in a paddock with a bull. Some people aren't. So personally, I'm not usually. So then I can bring up, maybe we could, just look at the forage in this paddock over here. But that dry walkthrough, it reminds us of things we may forget the day of the event, and it just really makes the whole event go much more smoothly. We can remind each other, so you were going to bring the name tags, and I was going to bring the water, and who's going to bring what. Or if there's any last-minute changes, someone might say, actually, something came up, and I can't do that. It just gives us a week to kind of replan, make any last-minute changes we need to make. So the people that cannot be there at the pre-meeting walkthrough, then who's ever responsible, the farmer, the educator, the agency staff, who was ever responsible for the event, that is responsible for sharing all this information and the timeline with the other participants, so that the day goes really smoothly. It's also a great way to look at signage. Where are we going to post pasture walk signs? Are we going to post pasture walk signs? A lot of the times we're hosting events on farms that are really out in the middle of nowhere. And we might think, well, those directions sounded really easy, but as we're driving to the farm, we noticed that the road sign, you can't even read it anymore because it's really old, a couple roads up. So things like that just to make the day go more clearly. I hosted an event this summer where I realized a couple days before the event, geez, the bridge is out a couple miles from me, and it's really easy to get around, but 10 miles away, it's a state highway, the signs take you 45 minutes out of the way to route you back to my house. So knowing things like that so we can put signage up saying road open to pasture walk, or, give them detours are really good. It's also a great way to preset some questions. So during the day, if the crowd seems a little bit quiet, it gives us time to think of questions that the farmer might not bring up, topics he might bring and not bring up that we really want to have out there. So it can kind of give us a chance to preset some questions. And it also gives us a chance to discuss registration. So how many people do we have? Do we have a lot of people? Do we have a few people? Because the group, as we will talk about it in a minute, is sort of going to dictate how we run our day, our attendance. So the day of the pasture walk, yay, it's a really exciting day. Everybody's excited to come out to the farm. It's really important for everybody involved, all the partners and the farmer, to be prepared early. So my farm is kind of long and narrow, and so usually we do a hayride around the farm and then get off at different stops to talk. So it's really important for me to have that hay wagon hooked up to a tractor that's full of gas, that there's air in the tires, and that there's hay in the wagon prior to the morning of the event when everybody's busy doing other things. Excuse me. It's also really important for all the partners to respect each other's roles. So any partner that says they're going to bring something, that they're going to be in charge of something, it's really important that they arrive early and take care of their role. It's really hard when a partner shows up at a farm and starts asking the farmer for help an hour before the event is supposed to start, when the farmer might still have one little task that she or he needs to take care of prior to the event. So that's really important. A registration table is always a great idea, and I personally am not great with names. And so what I really like to do is I like to have name tags set before people get to me to registration. So if it's a consumer day at my farm, and I've invited a lot of my customers out to my farm for the afternoon, the last thing I want to do is forget one of my really good customers' names. It's just really awkward. And with farmers too, we're the coordinator of the event. Everybody knows us, but it can be hard if we have a big crowd to remember everybody else. So if they have their name tag on before they come up to my registration list, it makes life go way easier. And it's really, we save embarrassment. Also, email. So on a registration list, if we just send around a hand list where everybody signs in and we have new people and we're trying to build our database, we really need people to share their email addresses with us, and most people write those really sloppily. So it's really great if we can have an iPad or a laptop or something that we can actually type those email addresses in, have people type their own in, pass it on a tablet, so that we know they're getting them right. Another really important thing is just to have a little bit of a backup plan for the Pasture Walker Field Day, because that backup plan, things can go wrong. We're dealing with farms. We had an example one time where a farmer's bull was down and was in really bad shape, so he wasn't able to join the beginning of our pasture walk. Luckily, we'd spent time with him the week before. We knew what his role was going to be, what he was going to talk about, and we could fill in. And while it was a hard day for the farmer, the pasture walk still came off really clean. So the other thing is I really like to engage the attendees and to maximize the network with the attendees the day of the event. So I want to have registration open like a half hour early, because a few people come from a long ways away or something and they might get there early. I really want to be able to engage those people, meet those people, find out who they are, and be really friendly and welcoming to everyone. And I love being able to introduce people to each other. So maybe we have a beginning sheep farmer, a really experienced sheep farmer. It's great to be able to introduce people to each other, to really make the learning happen more. So then everybody's gotten there. We've gotten through registration, and we're just getting the crowd going. We really kind of need to manage that crowd. So this is the time where we've already figured out through our planning stage, do we have a really big group? If we have more than 40 people, I really like to split that group. If we have more than 100 people, I really like to split that group in a few ways. So that's all part of our project planning. But it's also really going to dictate how we run the day. So if we have a small group of people, we can go around in a circle and we can all introduce ourselves. I usually like to have one preset person do that so that I know they're a real brief person. So we might say, please tell me, your name and one thing about your farm and one thing that you really want to learn today. If we give that to a real long-winded person at first, then the whole process slows down. If we have a big group of people, then it's great to just raise your hand. If you raise this type of animals, or you've been farming this many years, or whatever we're wanting to know from the audience, so we can best educate them. Then, of course, we want to thank the farmer. We want to thank the host, the partners, the funding sources, and we want to set our ground rules. So setting ground rules is really important. The ground rules that that it's a group, that we all stay together as a group, that if people want to have side conversations, please step aside. Maybe please don't go in any other buildings. It just really kind of depends on that group. But setting those ground rules is really important. Then we really want to start on time, stay on time, and end on time. A lot of people will show up late, and that is fine. But a lot of people have put a lot of effort into getting there on time, and I feel like we really need to respect that, because if we don't start on time, we're not going to end on time, and people may have later commitments later in the day. So I feel like those are really important things. And then managing extra input. So frequently we'll have a person there, I kind of call them the attention seeker, that might want the attention of the farmer. And so as we're walking from stop to stop, they start trying to grab the farmer and talking to them by themselves. And I feel like it's kind of the coordinator's role, or if you were the farmer and the coordinator, to say, we'll talk about that as we get back together in a group. Also, we'll frequently have people who kind of try to take over the show and share their story, which isn't why everybody else came to the event, and they might have a lot of great information, but if the event isn't one where we want everybody to share information, and it very well may be, so then it's fine, but if it's not, then we need to nicely thank that person and, invite them to host the next Pasture Walk, so we can all learn from them. So really managing the group to what the goals were set of the walk is really important. And when we wrap the Pasture Walk up, hopefully on time, we can invite people to stay. We can invite them to stay longer, to share more if the farmer's okay with that. Before we do that, I love passing out evaluations and sometimes having a little door prize for people who send it back. It can just be a jar of honey, something small, but it really gets evaluations back. A little chance for other people's announcements and thank yous. And then to end the walk on time, but to allow the group to stay. Sometimes people will see something out in the field that wasn't part of the walk, but everybody wants to go back to it and talk about it. So the people that need to leave don't feel uncomfortable leaving. They don't feel like they've missed anything they came for, but they can still go back and have the opportunity to do that. So with ending on time, this time went faster than I thought. I think I better turn it back to Larissa to see if we have any questions.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. That was a really, really excellent presentation, I think, for planning a pasture walk and just, to use all that information more broadly for other event planning. So as people are thinking about questions that you may have for Kirsten, I have a question for you all. Let me grab my last poll. So those of you that are with us, is planning, promoting, and or hosting, depending on who you work for or what your current situation is, a pasture walk in your future? So the options I have are, yes, I will likely either host or help someone else, or maybe you're not quite sure yet, got to figure out some things for the upcoming season or next year even, or, not likely. Maybe you joined this webinar just to kind of get a sense of what it meant to host a pasture walk. So I'll give everyone just a minute to choose their answer if you'd like to participate in our poll. Awesome. So it looks like the grand majority of folks, about 70% that have voted, say that they are likely to host or help someone else host. So that's wonderful. And then a whole bunch, basically everyone else, about 30%, are saying that maybe you're going to host or help someone host. So thank you for participating in that poll. I saw a couple of questions roll in, and so I'm gonna read them, and then Kirsten can respond to them. So I have a question about biosecurity and how do farms deal with biosecurity. The farmer says, I'd love to do a pasture walk, but I'm very protective about my heritage hogs. How are you dealing with this? Do you provide booties? Do you fully suit your visitors, or perhaps do something else?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And that is one of the questions that when I'm wearing my educator hat that I ask the farmer is, what is your biosecurity concern? Would you like people to wear booties or not? When I'm wearing and if people say yes, we want people to wear booties, then we provide booties and we wear them. They're really dangerous in the wintertime. So when it's really snowy and really slippery, that can be sort of a hard situation because we don't want anybody to fall down and break a leg. So we might just say, we would love to host that at your farm, but can we do it a different season when we can wear booties? We always have a bucket of sanitation water, and we usually have some booties. So it may be the host farmer that's not concerned about the biosecurity, but maybe one of the attendees says, "Ooh, I'm a little concerned. I don't want to take something home to my farm." So they then want booties. So we do try to provide booties, and it is really up to the host farmer whether they want people to wear them. When I wear my farmer hat, if I have poultry and there is poultry epidemic going around, or I'm going to host at a farm, I don't want to do that season maybe. I don't want other poultry producers coming to my farm if I feel like there's an epidemic in our area. And the same with our hogs. I actually never let anybody in our hog pens because of that issue. That being said, I realize that's not really a good way to handle biosecurity. It's not a super safe way to handle biosecurity, but it helps a little bit when I'm wearing my farmer hat.
Thank you, Kirsten. So I have a couple other questions along those lines. What about insurance? There's another question about insurance if someone gets hurt at the
Yeah, so that's a great question. So in the state of Wisconsin, and I don't know how this works in other states, but in the state of Wisconsin, our agritourism department, our tourism department, and then the agritourism department specifically has helped with some legislation. So if we have a specific sign, and if we go on their webpage, we can find it, posted at our event, then we are not liable for any injury unless, it was something the farmer did really badly, or that we were just being really unclear of things. That is another reason for that pre-walk walkthrough, is just to talk about safety and to even look at the equipment. I mean, if someone pulls out a really bad hay wagon, then we can say, hey, that's actually not going to work. So we do need to keep those safety things in mind, but and look at those at our pre-walk walkthrough or even prior to hosting the event. But the liability, at least in Wisconsin, our agritourism association has really helped us with that. So we actually have a sign that we take around to some of the events, and then actually it stays at one farmer's farm, and we kind of pick it up from him and kind of all share it.
Excellent. And I got some feedback that it sounds like there's some kind of similar regulations in Virginia from a farmer that kind of uses that same kind of liability signs and such. It works the same way out there. Another question about kind of the logistics. When serving food at events, are there concerns or permits required? And I wonder if that's, again, another kind of more state or local
That
based.
is also a case-by-case example. So what I have found is that if I have food catered in, that to me in Wisconsin is a county-by-county basis. So we have run into issue with that. If we don't charge for the event, if we don't announce the food, there's a lot of different rules. That is why that's a great reason to have a cater the event, because then they have the correct licenses to do so, and then we don't have to worry about the liability of food.
And this another question that's also related. What are your thoughts on having a paid event versus a free event?
So it depends on what you can get your group to pay, right? So when we have surveyed that with our group in Wisconsin a few years ago, people are very much willing to pay $35 for a workshop with a meal, $25 for a pasture walk with a meal. If we start dropping that price down to, like, say, $10 to attend a pasture walk, it really just depends on the nonprofit or the agency, who's coordinating that all, and then how much time and reporting is going to be involved in the transfer of that money, whether it's worth it or not. But I do love paid-for events. Once we get up to what I've sort of seen is once we get up to the $50, $75, we don't have as much attendance. So I do see people finding value in paying for an event, but I live in the Midwest, so they also will only pay so much.
No, that's really good information. I imagine that you might be able to charge more perhaps on the coasts for such events,
And
depending
also
on the food
the
involved.
client base. The
Yeah.
farmers seem to not be willing to pay as much as consumers. So it really, that kind of goes back to the goals and the audience.
Excellent. There you go. And actually, another related question. All these questions are kind of coming in a great order. Do you have any recommended funders for pasture walks that you feel comfortable sharing? And this question actually came from California, so that I know a lot of the things you do, Kristen,
Yeah,
are more local.
I cannot help with that question in California. I'm sorry. Maybe your local, if you have a California Farmers Union chapter, that would be county chapter, or a Farmers Union, or Farm Bureau, your university extension. Those people should be able to help you answer that question.
Excellent. Um, well, I don't see any other questions that have rolled in, so I'll give it another minute. If there are lingering questions, you'll also have the opportunity to ask Kirsten at a later time, or follow up with me. But just to kind of close out this webinar, I have a few housekeeping items. Let me just get to the next slide. So a recording of this webinar will be available soon. I know I mentioned that earlier, along with the slides. So it's going to be archived on our website, and I'm also going to email it to all of you, along with any of the links that seem to make sense that were mentioned through the presentation. And after this webinar ends in just a moment or two, you're going to be asked to complete a very short survey about your experience on this webinar. So I truly value any feedback that you care to share, whether it be about the content or about the technology. So if you could just take a minute or two to complete the survey, that would really help us for future events. And I have listed on our screen some of our upcoming webinars, mostly this February and March, and there'll probably be a couple more announced soon that we're adding to our docket. You can visit our website for more information about our farmer services and connect with us on social media. So, Kirsten, do you have any parting thoughts before I close the webinar?
Yeah, I feel like, for if you're a farmer and you want to host a pasture walk, don't be scared. So, the attendees are almost always really nice. Everybody's sort of in it together. As wearing my grazing educator hat, we work with farmers in every different way. So some farmers are really bashful and they don't like speaking in front of people, and they give us information and we share their information. Some farmers are really outgoing, and my biggest challenge of the day is just to keep them on time. So it's because they have 4 hours of information to share versus 2. So I feel like they can be all shapes and sizes. They can be large crowds, small crowds. It's just a great way to learn what's really happening. Share what worked well for you, and maybe mistakes so other people don't make them. It's just a great way to share with others. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. A real sincere thank you to you, Kristen, for your fantastic presentation and for taking the time to answer all of our questions. And I'd also like to thank all of you in the audience for your attention and interest being with us this lunch break this afternoon. It's certainly my pleasure, as always, to host this webinar. And I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your Wednesday and that we connect with you soon. So goodbye, and hope you stay warm. Bye.